A gentle family man loses the only job he has ever known. He decides there is just one open seat left in the whole world. He tells himself he is still a good person. So how far will a kind father go to be the last man standing? The movie begins inside a warm, happy home. Mansu is a proud paper engineer. His company sends him a box of expensive eel as a gift. He laughs that they only spoil him so they can work him even harder. His family gathers close and he feels like the luckiest man alive. His laughter fills every room. Today is also his birthday. His wife Miri teases him across the dinner table while the children pick at the food. The house is full of warmth and small jokes. Therefore, the meal becomes a portrait of everything Mansu has and everything he is about to lose. No one suspects what tomorrow holds. Mansu surprises Miri with a brand new pair of dance shoes. She lights up at once because the two of them love to dance together, but there is an old superstition. You should never gift shoes to a lover because they might run away in them. They laugh the warning off. Confident and content, Mansu pulls Miri up to practice their steps. 1 2 3 2 2 3. Therefore their quiet daughter C1 watches from the side. She rarely speaks a word, but she plays the cello like a dream and everyone treats her gift as the family's pride. Mansu has given 25 years of his life to solar paper. Tonight he says the words he truly believes. He has it all. He has the job, the house, the wife, the children. But remember this happy man because the ground is already shifting under his feet. The next day the storm arrives. New owners have bought solar paper. As soon as they take over, they announce a plan to cut the production line by 20%. Therefore, they hand Mansu a cold demand. They want a list of names. They want him to choose who gets fired. Mansu is shaken. These are the veterans who taught him his craft. These are young men who came of age in his factory. They are workers who lovingly cared for the machines, so he cannot bring himself to point a finger at a single one of them. He stands up and fights for them with his whole heart. A list like that, he says, points a finger straight at innocent people. He refuses to give it, but the new bosses do not care about his loyalty or his old-fashioned pride. They only see numbers. He pleads for the old promise the company once made, a job for life. He says that beautiful tradition is being tossed out like a pair of worn shoes. Therefore his voice rises, his throat goes dry, and tempers across the warehouse begin to boil over. The argument spills into a scuffle among the desperate men. They grab and shove and shout. But in the end, none of it changes the decision because the choice was never really his to make. Remember this room. It is the last day his world stays whole. Back at home, the family senses something is wrong. They ask, almost joking, whether the company really sent that fancy gift. Mansu laughs it off and brushes the question aside. Therefore he keeps his fear locked inside, unable to say the words out loud just yet. The next morning he dresses, straightens his tie, and mutters to himself that he slaved for 25 years. He still walks like a working man, but the truth has already landed, heavy and final. Mansu has lost his job and nothing will ever be the same. Alone, he tries to hold himself together. He breathes deep and recites a strange little chant like a prayer. I am a good person. Losing my job is not my choice. So he repeats it again and again, willing himself to believe that he can survive this. His voice shakes only a little. He adds the rest of the chant. My loving family will support me fully as I seek new opportunities. He straps confidence around himself like armor. Therefore he steps out the door certain of one comforting promise. In just 3 months he will be hired again. Miri sits with him and comforts him gently. She reminds him that she once made a brave new start of her own as a single mother that he proudly chose to marry. Therefore she tells him with love that he can do exactly the same. He is not finished yet. Together they chant his new mantra into the air, a new start. He is the head of a family. To put food in his family's mouths, there is nothing he will not do, but hold on to those words. That gentle vow is the very thing that will twist into something dark. Then time begins to skip. A card reads 3 months later, then changes again. Therefore 13 long months have actually passed. Mansu is still jobless, the bright chant has worn thin, and the comfortable life is quietly slipping away beneath the family's feet. The chant cannot stop the clock. A friend named Namgu throws him a sudden lifeline. A boss is curious about Mansu and wants to meet him. The catch is that the boss is flying out at 5 o'clock, so Mansu drops everything and rushes toward the interview, desperate for any chance. Namgu warns him about the question they always ask. What is your weak point? It is a delicate, dangerous thing to answer, but Mansu has no clean reply ready, and that small gap of doubt begins to gnaw at his fragile confidence. At home, he frets and asks Miri to help him find the answer. She only teases him, saying his weakness is that he loves his plants too much, that he is practically a vegetable. Therefore, he walks into the interview room still unsure of how to sell himself. The real catch finally stings. If hired, he will work under Namgu, his own former junior, the man who once answered to him. So he swallows his pride as best he can and tries to say smoothly that he is always learning from everyone. He lays out his whole life of effort. He started straight out of high school, then earned a chemistry degree at night by distance learning. He mastered safety management. Therefore, he tries to prove that no one has worked harder or sacrificed more than he has. He proudly mentions his greatest honor, Pulp Man of the Year, and the home he bought back, the very house he was born in. But he keeps saying the words "of course" over and over, and he hears himself doing it, and it makes him sweat with nerves. Then comes the dreaded question once more, what is your weak point? So he tries a clever line. The one thing he truly cannot say, he claims, is his biggest weakness of all. But cleverness is not what they wanted, and the room stays cold and unmoved. Later, Miri pushes him toward fresh targets. She has heard that Moon Paper has cracked the tough Japanese market and is thriving. Therefore, she urges him again and again to look into Moon Paper and chase a real opportunity before the winter sets in. She nags him to fix his bad tooth and to get hired before the cold weather comes. But his stubborn pride keeps tripping him up at every turn. And remember the name Moon Paper. It will come to matter far more than either of them can imagine. On a long company video shoot, Choi proudly explains that paper makers do not raise forests, that trees are grown, cut, and replanted again and again. But the polished promotion only reminds Mansu how far outside that comfortable world he now stands. Miri returns with news of her own. She has taken a part-time job at a dental clinic. The children cheer for their mother, proud and excited. Therefore, she finally forces the whole family to sit down and face one hard, frightening truth. They are in a real crisis. The cheering slowly fades to worry. She lays down new rules. Everything that is not essential has to go, with one exception. C1's cello lessons stay, so the family begins to strip away its old comforts one by one while clinging to the daughter's precious gift. She trades the car for something smaller and cheaper. Then she says the hardest thing of all, they must sell the house. But Mansu barely seems to hear her. The very idea of losing his home cannot fit inside his proud, aching head. Selling, she explains, would clear their loans and let them rent a small apartment to survive. Therefore, the cause becomes plain and brutal. Mansu promised work in 3 months. They kept living as before, draining his severance, and now that money has finally run dry. Mansu pleads for the house with everything he has. It holds his whole childhood. With his own hands, he tore down the old barn and built the greenhouse and the swing. Every corner of it is his, but none of that sentiment can stop the foreclosure that is coming. Miri reads out the list of things already up for sale. The piano, the living room table, the TV, the carpet, even her tennis racket. Therefore, she cancels the dance lessons and the streaming too, peeling away the family's small joys until almost nothing soft is left. Then she delivers the worst news of all. In their circumstances, they simply cannot feed so many mouths. Mansu panics, thinking she means the children, but she does not mean the children. She means the 2 beloved family dogs, C2 and Raitu. The children beg and cry to keep their pets. The parents promise it is only temporary. The dogs will go to another home for a little while, so they swear over and over that C2 and Raitu will come back the moment Dad finally gets hired. They hand the dogs over and watch the car drive them away. Mansu kneels and whispers a quiet promise. He will bring them back. He will, but that small vow buries itself deep inside him, and it slowly becomes the obsession that drives everything to come. The empty leashes hang by the door. A potential buyer arrives to view the house. He is a smug, wealthy man who already owns land nearby. Therefore, he strolls through Mansu's home as if he owns it, eyeing the greenhouse as a future putting green and insulting Mansu to his very face. The buyer pokes at Mansu's proud family treasures. He points at the old war service certificate and an old wartime keepsake hanging on the wall. So Mansu forces a thin, polite smile while his dignity quietly bleeds out in front of this gloating stranger. The buyer even tries to purchase their bed and hopes aloud that the family will move far away, but then something unexpected happens. C1, the silent child, suddenly speaks. She's afraid that if they move, the dogs will never be able to find them again. Mansu kneels down to his daughter and makes a solemn vow. We are not leaving. I promise. Therefore, from this single moment, keeping the house stops being a hope and becomes a war he silently decides he will fight by absolutely any means. He hunts down Choi Sunchul, a powerful man in the paper industry, and corners him in a public restroom. He begs, clumsily, for any chance at a job, but Choi shoves him away in disgust and tells him to have some shame and not do this here, of all places. To soften the blow, Choi mockingly invites Mansu out to his fancy island home for a barbecue someday, then strides off without another glance. So Mansu is left standing there, humiliated, clutching the last shreds of his wounded pride. Drifting and ashamed, Mansu slips into a whiskey bar to drown the day. Then Miri calls. Therefore he panics and swears he is only drinking apple juice, sitting all alone, while the camera shows plainly that he is lying straight to his worried wife. A fresh blow lands almost at once. The cello teacher calls to quit on C1, but the reason cuts deep in a strange way. The girl is so outrageously gifted that she has outgrown the teacher and now needs a real music professor to guide her. A professor, of course, means fees on an entirely different level. Therefore, the pressure on a jobless father grows heavier still. He now needs real money, serious money, and he needs it fast, with no honest way left to earn it. At home, Miri keeps the news playing about Moon paper booming, and she compares her struggling husband to the polished, successful man on the screen. But Mansu no longer sees a role model there. He sees only the man standing between him and a job. Resentment hardens quietly inside him. He even mutters dark, half-joking wishes about his thriving rivals being struck down by misfortune. So behind his calm, gentle eyes, a terrible idea is slowly beginning to take shape, one beat at a time. Choi keeps pressuring Mansu to come and live out on his island. The ferry runs often, he says, the air is clean, the nights are beautiful. But it is also a lonely, isolated, faraway place where a man could vanish and no one would notice for a while. Mansu finally says something chilling out loud, almost to himself. Even if this man simply disappeared, it is not as if Mansu could just take his place. Therefore the thought has been planted, and he begins to wonder exactly how many people really stand in his way. He learns the competition for that one good post will be fierce. It is a fine spot, full of sun and a nice breeze, so he starts counting his rivals quietly like a man doing terrible arithmetic. 10 people, 5, maybe only 4 others. Soon after, Mansu buys a strange item from a seller and carefully asks the price. But the film does not show us what it is. Therefore we feel the dread without seeing the deed, and we understand that a cold, deliberate plan is being assembled, piece by piece. At home, Miri scolds him for shutting himself away and reeking of drink. She begs him to save their dying pear tree, choked with bugs, so the cracks in their marriage spread wider with every passing, exhausting day, even as her words bounce off his closed face. A new job posting appears from a company called Red Pepper Paper. They want a master's degree, fluent Japanese, and a personal photo sent by mail, never by internet. Therefore Mansu is far from the only desperate paper man hungrily chasing this single rare opening. We meet one of those rivals. His name is Gu Bum-mo, and he proudly calls himself a resolutely analog man who loves only paper, vinyl, and film. But remember his face carefully. This quiet, devoted man will need it before the story is done. Bum-mo recites his shining career and his own Pulp Man of the Year award, then admits he has been jobless for 8 long months but feels fully recharged. So he is exactly the kind of strong, hungry rival that Mansu has every reason to fear. Alone, Mansu studies an old North Korean keepsake taken down from his family's wall. He turns it over in his hands and counts softly under his breath. 1, 2, 3 men. Therefore his dark plan now has a clear and chilling shape and a number attached to it. That night he tucks C1 into bed and tells her a soft little story. There is a house with a beautiful pear tree, he says, but bugs are eating it alive and it makes him sad. So all his hidden sorrow leaks out gently, disguised inside a fairy tale for his child. Miri keeps prodding him about whether any interviews have come through. He insists, calmly, that the calls will surely come. but she begins to fear the strange, distant calm settling over him, a quiet she can no longer seem to reach or understand. Something has changed in his quiet eyes. She confesses her own fresh wound. She failed yet another acting audition, told her skin was too firm to play a grieving widow. Therefore both husband and wife are wounded dreamers now, clinging to each other and to a life that keeps sinking beneath them. To comfort each other, they remember the night they first fell in love during a blackout at the theater. The lights went out, people screamed, Miri felt panic rising. Then Mansu appeared out of the dark like a streetlight switching on and took her gently by the hand. She recalls their first kiss and his clumsy, sweet compliment, comparing her lips to the finest tracing paper, mangling the brand name as he did it. They laugh together at the old, tender memory, but the warmth of it cannot pay a single one of their mounting bills. The fight returns, sharper than before. Miri rages that paper has ruined them, that her own father once offered to set him up with a cafe instead. She says he could run a music cafe and earn far more, so years of buried anger come pouring out of her at last. Mansu stands his ground, immovable. Paper has fed him for 25 years, he insists. It is simply how he is meant to be, but his pride is starting to sound less like devotion and more like a trap, slowly closing its jaws around the man and his family. He clings to one last stubborn hope. Real companies still send letters on paper, he argues, not cold emails. Therefore he becomes fixated on the mailbox, on that one perfect paper job, on the dream of finally being the chosen man once again. At the dental clinic, Miri now works as a hygienist near a friendly dentist doctor. Oh, so a new man begins to drift around the anxious edges of Mansu's imagination, feeding a quiet, ugly jealousy that he can barely admit even to himself. Meanwhile, Mansu keeps inventing wilder excuses for his absences. He even pretends he was bitten by a snake, claiming he once learned how to handle it in a stage play. But his lies are growing stranger and more elaborate, stacking up faster than he can manage them. Husband and wife circle the abandoned dance lessons once again. They practiced so much, all for nothing, since they quit. Therefore the missed dance becomes a small, aching symbol of everything the family has been forced to give up to survive. Miri remembers being the prettiest girl around, a confident divorcee with a child who earned more money than Mansu back then. She wonders aloud why he ever proposed to her, but he swears with feeling that it was never, ever about her paycheck. They make a tender little pact. They will have 10 times more fun from now on and stop wasting their days complaining and fighting. So for one fragile, beautiful evening, the bruised marriage feels almost whole and young again. A long-held secret surfaces softly between them. Their son Siwon is not Mansu's child by birth. They once agreed to tell the boy when he was older, but Mansu has raised him since he was 2 years old, so as far as he is concerned, he is fully his father. They rise and dance together again, slowly in the quiet house the way they always have. Follow me, only me. Therefore we see plainly that the love between them is real and deep, even as a terrible darkness keeps gathering quietly all around it. Mansu psyches himself up like a soldier before battle. This, he tells himself, will be the very best job interview ever. He will go in and slay them all, but his strange, fierce calm is hiding something far darker than ordinary nerves. In a brighter moment, Mansu coaches himself before the mirror with fierce, almost frightening focus. Slay them all, he tells his reflection. Therefore we feel how thoroughly he has convinced himself that this hunt is just another job to be done well. A call comes in, claiming to be from Red Pepper Paper. The voice plays an odd little game about exactly where Mansu can be heard best on the line. Therefore Mansu is suddenly told that the boss is very curious about him and wants to meet him at once. The boss, the voice says, is flying back to Zurich at 5 o'clock. Mansu must come right now, all the way from his hometown, so he is pressured into bolting out the door instantly, the exact same trick that was once used to lure another desperate man. He scrambles to throw on his good clothes and race off without a second thought. But something about the whole setup feels rehearsed and false, like a trap a clever man might lay for someone he wanted gone. Remember this rushed, urgent call. The promised follow-up message never arrives. No new messages, the phone reads coldly. Therefore Mansu slowly realizes, far too late, that the whole thing was a cruel, deliberate trick and that the call was a lie meant to make a fool of him. He tries again and again to call the number back. Please answer. Come on, pick up. but the line stays silent and cold, so his humiliation curdles into something colder and harder, a quiet rage that begins to point him toward an unthinkable answer. Mansu reaches out once more to Choi Sunchul, fishing casually for a meeting. He plays it light and friendly, suggesting they catch up over a simple drink. Therefore he begins, gently and patiently, to draw his unsuspecting target slowly closer to him. They agree to meet at a fried chicken place after work, easy and ordinary. But beneath the warm, neighborly tone, Mansu is quietly setting a snare for a man who has no idea anything is wrong. Hold on to that friendliness. It is a mask. At the clinic, Dr. O greets Mansu warmly and asks kindly about his bad tooth, inviting him to stop by. So the dentist's easy, genuine charm only feeds Mansu's jealous suspicion of his wife, twisting an innocent kindness into another imagined threat. The smile never reaches Mansu's eyes. Driving Siwon home, Mansu fumbles awkwardly and embarrasses himself in front of the doctor. The watchful girl notices the strange, prickly talk about an age gap between her parents, but she quietly asks her father not to mention her to that man at all. Alone in the car, Siwon listens to a sad, longing song about a child missing her mother. Therefore we feel the loneliness of this silent prodigy, the one fragile soul carrying her own quiet grief through the middle of all this family chaos. Mansu's troubled mind spirals into a feverish fantasy. He imagines a theatrical, almost operatic duel against Dr. O, fighting for Miri's love like a jealous stage hero. But it is all in his unraveling head, and it shows just how far his obsession has pushed him. In the daydream, the imagined Dr. O throws Mansu's own failures back in his face. He never listened to his wife's sensible ideas. He was too proud to change. Therefore, even inside his own fantasy, Mansu cannot escape the accusation of his stubborn ego. The dream rival mocks him without mercy. Sell the house, lift boxes, do honest low work. But Mansu protests that he is an engineer, an expert, far too important to stoop so low, so the film quietly reveals that his real enemy has always been his own pride. He clings, even in fantasy, to his hollow defense. Losing my job is not my choice, how many times must I say it? But a voice answers back with the truth he keeps refusing to hear. The job is not the problem is how he chooses to deal with it. He snaps back to cold reality. 10 missed calls from Miri glow accusingly on his phone. Therefore his double life is becoming harder and harder to hold together, with the family pulling at one hand and his terrible secret work pulling at the other. It is the day of Siwon's big dance party, and the child sweetly wishes her father good luck. But Mansu has somewhere else to be tonight, somewhere far darker than any school dance, and he must wear his cheerful family mask while he plans it. He puts on a costume and a bright, clownish face for the party crowd, joking and showing off a dance he barely knows. So no one in that happy room suspects for a moment that the friendly neighbor is carrying a monstrous secret beneath the smile. Far away from the laughter and music, his real plan moves forward in the dark. The film shows us only the dread, never the deed itself. Therefore we understand, quietly and terribly, that a rival has left the world and that Mansu is the reason why. Back home, Miri's jealousy finally explodes. She is convinced he has been unfaithful, and she tears furiously into every lie and every gap in his stories. So the strained marriage reaches a raw, screaming peak, with both of them wounded and shaking. She drags up his old, dark drinking years and the long ordeal they barely survived together. For 9 hard years he stayed sober, gritting his teeth. But now she is terrified that he is sliding back into that old chaos, taking the whole family down with him. The fight twists between the furious and the absurd, circling a mismatched costume and a misread cartoon. Therefore even their rage keeps looping back to the same wound. They have grown so far apart that they can no longer read each other at all. Miri turns her questions on him like a sharp detective. Why the locked greenhouse? Why thousands of miles driven in a single month? Why the snake bite at a job interview? But Mansu has no honest answer to give her for any of it, and his silence speaks loudly. He pleads weakly that his interviews are simply very difficult, that looking another person right in the eye is hard for him. So he hides his mounting guilt behind the careful, ordinary language of a man just struggling to find work. Some time later, calmer now, Mansu walks into a small shoe store. Therefore, a quiet, fateful encounter is about to begin over nothing more than a simple pair of shoes, and neither man yet knows how the night will end. The lonely shop clerk fusses eagerly over Man-Su, anxious to make a sale, almost desperate to please. But this clerk is far more than he seems. Remember him closely. He is no ordinary salesman. He is another paper man fallen on the very same hard times. The clerk gently asks whether the shoes are meant as a gift for a daughter. So Man-Su softens, lowering his guard, and the two weary strangers slowly begin to recognize something painfully familiar in each other across the counter. The clerk confesses that he too is an out-of-work man and that he can spot a fellow jobless comrade at a single glance. Therefore, Man-Su slowly realizes who is standing before him. This kind, struggling clerk is Gu Bum-mo, the very rival he had been hunting. The two of them bond over the strange, secret beauty of paper. Banknotes, passports, lottery tickets, even cigarette filters. The clerk calls fine white paper a kind of quiet art, but Man-Su listens to every warm word with a hidden, terrible purpose in his heart. The clerk speaks lovingly of his own gifted little daughter, a cello player just like Siwon. He cannot possibly afford the fine instrument she needs, so all he wants in the whole world is to buy his girl a pair of shiny shoes for her Christmas recital. He says he will gladly wait late all the way until 8 o'clock just to bring his daughter in to try the shoes on her own feet. Therefore, Man-Su finds himself staring straight into a living mirror of his own life, his own love, and his own desperation. The clerk quietly admits that he only earns a small commission if Man-Su buys the shoes through him personally. So this gentle, broken man has pinned all of his fragile hope on this one tiny, ordinary sale to a kind stranger. Man-Su steps away and chants his dark refrain over and over under his breath. No other choice, no other choice, no other choice. But now those familiar words have curdled completely, twisting from a coping prayer into a cold justification for the unthinkable. Outside, fate tightens the noose. The clerk's old car has broken down, and now he cannot even drive to pick up his waiting daughter. Therefore, the cruel coincidences keep stacking, pulling the two desperate men closer and closer together in the gathering dark. Man-Su offers helpfully to fix the car, casually calling himself a machine repairman by trade. So with one small, friendly favor, he lures his trusting rival away from the safe, lit public store, out toward the lonely quiet of the road. The two men drive off together into the night to find the broken-down car. But once again, the film leaves us only with dread, never the act itself. Therefore, we sense, with a sick certainty, that this gentle soul is walking quietly toward his last night. A slow, rain-soaked ballad carries us through the heavy aftermath. Therefore, the film lets the sorrow breathe and settle, refusing to show the deed, lingering instead on the cold, empty quiet that surrounds a man who has done a terrible thing. The streetlights and bright shop signs seem to laugh cruelly into the lonely, dripping night, but inside the music there is only grief. Another good man has left the world, and somewhere a small girl is still waiting for shiny shoes that will never arrive. The rain keeps falling on it all. Suddenly, the police arrive at Man-Su's front door, and Miri panics on the spot. Therefore, the long-feared reckoning seems at last to be crashing down on the whole family, and Man-Su must summon every ounce of his fragile calm. Man-Su steadies everyone with quiet, firm words. Do not panic. He says he needs to change his clothes first. But the calm is only a thin shell stretched over racing, pounding fear, and one wrong word from anyone could shatter the whole thing. Their son Siwon nervously tries to take the blame for something. Man-Su quickly cuts in, saying it is all his own fault for being a bad father. So the frightened family instinctively rushes to throw itself in front of one another, shielding each other from the law. Then the real truth comes out, and it is far smaller than Man-Su feared. Siwon and a friend were caught selling some phones from a shop. Therefore, the police have actually come for the boys this time, and not, by some miracle, for Man-Su himself. At the scene, the two mothers begin angrily blaming each other for the boys' trouble. But Man-Su sees his opening at once and steps smoothly into the role of the calm, capable father, the one man who can fix this for everyone. At the station, Man-Su gently works on the frightened boy. Doing a crime all alone, he murmurs, is a very lonely and scary thing. So he wins the child's trust as a fellow teammate rather than a judge, drawing the truth out of him with quiet, practiced ease. He spins the whole mess into a grand story of a family at war, of men whose duty is to protect their women, and he invokes Grandpa's old war relic as proof. But in doing so, he is quietly teaching this young boy his own dangerous and twisted logic. The other boy testifies that he was the one who dragged C1 into the scheme. Therefore, the blame neatly shifts away from Mansu's son, and his careful, behind-the-scenes maneuvering begins smoothly to pay off. It turns out the shop belongs to the other boy's father, an old acquaintance named Wonho. Mansu quietly pushes for private settlement to make the charges vanish, so he leans hard on an old connection to bury the whole embarrassing affair. Behind closed doors, Mansu plays brutal hardball with Wonho. He calmly hints that he knows Wonho's own shameful secrets and would not hesitate to use them. But he frames every threat as nothing more than a loving father protecting his children. In one cold move, Mansu flips the entire table. Now Wonho will not be buying his house after all, and the charges against the boys will simply disappear. So Mansu reveals a chilling new talent for bending frightened people exactly to his will. He calmly gathers up the stolen phones to make them vanish for good. Therefore, he is learning, with frightening speed, how to bury evidence, erase problems, and walk away from his own messes without leaving a single trace behind. He decides to plant a tree right over the buried phones. The tastiest things, he says lightly, grow on filth, since fertilizer is made from waste. But that small, casual line carries a far darker double meaning for everything else he has quietly put into the ground. Mansu confides a dark family history to his son. Grandpa lost his pig farm to disease and never the same after the war, took his own life inside this very house. So the home itself, the one he is fighting so hard to keep, is soaked in old, buried sorrow. He explains that Grandpa once had to bury 20,000 sick pigs and carried that horror to the end of his days. Therefore, a haunted, broken streak clearly runs deep in this family's veins, passing quietly from one generation down to the next. Mansu quietly throws something away, carefully hiding it from both the boy and from Miri. But the secrets are now piling up far faster than he can possibly bury them all. Remember the buried things. The ground is filling with what he cannot face. Then the detective arrives, gentle and unhurried, asking polite questions about the interviews at Papyrus. Therefore, the slow, patient hunt for the missing paper men has finally circled all the way around to Mansu's own front door. The detective casually asks if anything strange has happened lately, if Mansu has ever felt himself in danger, and notes that 2 men connected to these jobs have now vanished. But Mansu plays it cool and curious, careful not to show a flicker of fear. Then Mansu makes one small, fatal slip. He muses aloud about who got lucky enough to be hired after the 2 men disappeared, but the detective only ever said the men disappeared. So a tiny, telling crack opens in Mansu's otherwise perfect mask. The detective pounces, softly and politely. Why, he wonders, did Mansu just assume the missing men were gone for good? Therefore, the careful cat-and-mouse game has truly begun, and now Mansu must talk and charm his way back out of his own careless words. Mansu smoothly covers with a worldly little line. In today's world, he shrugs, when someone disappears, they usually do not come back. But the patient detective quietly files away every single word the man says, missing nothing at all. The detective shares more. One missing man's wife reported him gone, his car found sitting abandoned and alone. He had fallen into deep depression after being fired. So the sad story keeps echoing almost perfectly the shape of Mansu's own broken life. He notes pointedly that a single phone holds the record of every contact and every missed call a person ever made. Therefore, one small device could unravel this entire mystery. Remember those missed calls. They are a thread waiting to be pulled. A tense moment unfolds around an umbrella and a ringing phone. A new voice answers, claiming to be the head of human resources at Papyrus. So the separate threads of the 2 missing men finally begin knotting themselves together into one picture. The HR voice explains they tried to hire one applicant, then a second, when neither could be reached. The top scorer of all had been Gu Bummo, but now both of the highest-ranked men have vanished without a single trace, as if swallowed by the earth. The picture sharpens cruelly. 2 paper men who knew each other, who once competed fiercely, both gone at the very same time. Therefore, the detective is steadily closing in on a single chilling pattern hiding behind all these polite disappearances. He reveals that faint traces of one man's struggle were found near the abandoned car, along with a single spent shell. But even with all of this, the detective still does not yet have his man or a name to put to the crime. The detective warns Mansu with a thin smile to be very careful until the culprit is finally caught. So Mansu must keep smiling back, calm and grateful, while the danger draws its net steadily tighter and tighter around his throat. His own heart pounds beneath the smile. Then Siwon stops them all with a strange, knowing remark. She says flatly that she will be sure to get in touch the moment she herself goes missing. Therefore, even this quiet, watchful child seems to sense the darkness that has crept into her own home. She suddenly breaks down crying over the lost family dogs, and Mansu gathers her close to comfort her. He promises again that he will bring C2 and Raitu back. So his entire dark, terrible project narrows down once more to that one tender, simple goal. He quietly steels himself for what comes next. Just one more, he tells himself. But one more means one more job, one more rival removed, one more secret to be carried out and buried. The gentle father keeps promising himself it is almost over. Out in the wild countryside, Mansu finally corners Choi Sunchul, the proud man who once humiliated him in a restroom. He introduces himself plainly and without anger, so the desperate beggar and the smug manager meet again, this time far from any other soul. Mansu admits almost sweetly that he has been watching Choi's glamorous, enviable life online every single day. Choi laughs and jokes that he is apparently being stalked, but the drunk, careless man does not begin to grasp the real danger he is now in. Over drinks, Mansu finally pours out the old pain that started all of this. After he slaved 25 years, they gave him just 25 minutes to clear out his desk. Therefore, the deep wound at the root of everything reopens, raw and bleeding, all over again. He describes how they marched him out the back door, his whole working life already boxed up by a stranger and waiting in the guard's hands. So Choi, warm and pitying in his drunkenness, finally sees a fellow broken man sitting across from him in the dark. The two men bond drunkenly over old grievances and old machines, with Choi boasting proudly of his 96% quality ratio in his prime. Therefore, the long night blurs into easy talk and dangerously lowered guards, exactly as Mansu intends it to. Choi, soft-hearted now, takes pity on Mansu and even floats a kind idea aloud. He could recommend getting Mansu hired as a second-line manager to share the heavy load. But Choi has no idea that he is cheerfully offering a job to the architect of his own undoing. Choi promises to put in a word with the higher-ups. The two of them, he says happily, would work wonderfully together, and a team and a B team, complementing each other. Therefore, Mansu has finally maneuvered his way through charm and patience toward the job he craves. But then, between drinks, Choi turns suddenly suspicious. How, he wonders aloud, does a mere line manager afford such a grand house and such a nice car? So he begins to hint, half-joking, that Mansu might be quietly pocketing dirty money on the side. Choi keeps pressing the dangerous question, smiling but prying. Others might really think you take cash, he needles. But poking into Mansu's carefully buried secrets is the single most dangerous thing any person in this story can possibly do. In an instant, the whole warm mood curdles and dies. You are finished now, Mansu says quietly, and every trace of friendliness drains out of his voice. Therefore, the long, gentle, patient snare he laid finally snaps shut hard around the unsuspecting Choi. Mansu chants his refrain again through gritted teeth, half to steady himself and half to hurry. No other choice. Hurry up. But the desperate, worn-out excuse can no longer hide the truth. The gentle, loving father has become something monstrous in the dark. Out in the freezing black night, the long ordeal drags on, brutal and cold. His head pounds and his soul frays at the edges. So Mansu pushes himself grimly through the very worst of it, doing what he has somehow convinced himself he must. In the bitter cold of the island night, Mansu searches for warmth and shelter, his head splitting. So even as the deed grinds on, the film keeps him human and shivering, never letting us forget the cost he is paying inside. By a roaring bonfire, the drunken Choi raves that this wild night is his lifelong dream come true and calls Mansu simply the best. But he is celebrating with childlike joy beside the very man who has come all this way to undo him. Through the haze, Choi confesses something quietly true. When you finally get the thing you wanted most, he slurs, it only leaves you empty. His wife was right all along. Therefore, even the supposed winner of this cruel paper world turns out to be hollow inside. The fire crackles between two fated men. Then Mansu wavers at the brink. He really does not want to do this, he admits to himself. But if he stops now, then the others who are already gone will have left it for nothing at all. So he traps himself once more inside his own grim, twisted logic. He clings desperately to the thought that he simply cannot let their losses be meaningless. Therefore, the gentle man talks himself one final time into the unthinkable, alone in the firelight, telling himself it was never truly his choice to make. Later, Miri calls him on a shaky, breaking line, and he claims he cannot turn on the video. Therefore, he keeps lying to her face, insisting he is simply visiting a helpful old friend from Moon Paper who needs his expert advice. Miri brings up the detective's grim warning that the interviewees keep dying and she is frightened for him out there at night. But he insists with a strange certainty that he is perfectly fine because, after all, he is him. She begs him not to carry this whole crushing load alone. Even a single sheet of paper, she says, is easier when two people lift it together. So she reaches out for the loving husband she remembers, with no idea what he has actually become out there. He promises to bring all the dogs back and counts the whole family as 6, pets included. He tells her this is his very last interview. Therefore, he quietly frames his darkest act of all as nothing more than the final step needed to save everyone he loves. He says he is done digging now and all that is left is to plant the tree. But Miri answers with a vow of her own. If he is doing something bad out there, then she is doing it right alongside him for better or worse. Back home, Siwon stumbles onto a frightening discovery. The boy has been digging in the ground and found something he was never meant to find. Therefore, the secrets Mansu has buried are beginning, slowly, to surface in the very soil where his children play. The boy says he uncovered something near the spot where Mansu buried a pig last year. Miri tries to wave it all away as old fertilizer for the trees, but the ground is keeping no one's secrets safe anymore, and the truth is pushing its way up toward the light. Miri quietly pieces it together. The buried thing, she tells herself, must be the pig her husband once put in the ground to feed the tree. So she chooses, for now, to believe the gentlest explanation and looks away from the darker one. Mansu comes home to a calm, watchful, dangerous Miri. The interview went well, he tells her smoothly. So the two of them begin to circle each other once more in a quiet, careful war of half-truths, each one watching the other for any crack. In a tender game, Mansu asks his family to hold their breath and count, turning their fear into a small, shared moment. Therefore, the household clings to these little rituals of normal life, even as everything underneath has changed forever. She smells the smoke clinging to his clothes and presses him hard about the drinking. He blames a lonely friend's bonfire and barbecue. Therefore, every single lie he tells now requires yet another lie to prop it up, and the whole tower grows taller and shakier. Then a moment of real tenderness breaks through the suspicion. He apologizes for working so hard for so long that he never let her simply have fun, but she only wishes, sadly, that he had never lived quite so brutally and joylessly for that endless paper life. For a moment, they are simply young again. He shares the hard, cold wisdom he claims to have learned from his ordeal. You need a creative plan, you must shift your whole perspective, and when the moment demands it, you must be able to say no. So his ruthless little lessons sound almost like a confession. At last, the real interview he schemed and lied for finally arrives. The company proudly shows off a lights-out, fully automated factory, run by machines that need no human hands at all. Therefore, the future he sacrificed everything for is one with almost no workers left in it. The bosses say it plainly and coldly. With full automation, the workers simply must be cut. There is no other choice. But now Mansu, the very man who once refused to fire a single soul, just nods quietly along, agreeing without a flicker of protest. Meanwhile, the detective digs up an old secret bid from years ago when two rival paper giants once faced off against each other for a huge government contract. So the deep, bitter root of all this rivalry between the missing men finally rises to the surface. The two bidders, it turns out, were Gu Bum-mo and Go Si-jo, the very men who vanished. Therefore, the detective now grasps just how small, tangled, and savagely competitive this quiet little world of paper men has truly always been. One missing man's wife recalls his haunted, weeping sleep talk after a fateful business trip to Daejeon. "It is not fair," he cried out in his sleep. "Do not insult me." But his raw despair only deepens the tragic, sorrowful picture forming around these broken men. In his sleep, she says, he even gathered the phlegm in his mouth and spat on his own face, then jolted awake in horror at himself. Therefore these were already shattered, desperate men, long before they ever crossed paths with Mansu in the dark. After being fired, the man drank all day and sank into a deep depression, and he secretly kept an old firearm he never registered. So the detective begins to wonder, for a while, whether these missing men might simply have given up and ended their own lives. One frantic wife begs the police to find her husband fast, terrified he might leave the world by his own hand, the old relic gone with him. But the patient detective is starting to see the shape of a much darker hand quietly at work behind it all. The detective lays out photographs and asks the wife which old relic it was. So the evidence narrows steadily down toward one specific old relic, the very same kind of old wartime relic that hangs, even now, on the wall of Mansu's family home. Then the investigation lands hard, but it lands wrong. "Be wary of Gu Bum-mo," the detective concludes. "Remember his face." He suspects that Bum-mo took Si-jo's life and then ran, therefore suspicion falls heavily on the wrong man, on a victim rather than the culprit. The detective stares at the photo of Bum-mo, certain now that he is the man to hunt. But the audience knows the terrible truth he cannot see. The real culprit is sitting quietly at home, planning his children's breakfast. That single mistake changes everything. The law is now chasing a man who is already gone, a victim, instead of the quiet father at the true center of it all. But that means Mansu, against every odd, may slip free of the net entirely. Back at home, the impossible finally comes true. Mansu cheerfully celebrates his very first day at a brand new job. Therefore, after all the lies and all the buried secrets, the desperate man has somehow, at last, won the one open seat he was fighting for. He tells Miri she can quit the clinic now and take up tennis again, and offers to buy her a shiny new racket. But she gently refuses, choosing instead to keep saving their money. Slowly, piece by piece, the comfortable old life is sliding back into place. He calls off the sale of the house entirely. They will keep their home after all. So the one precious thing he fought so darkly and so terribly to protect is, at last, finally and truly safe in his hands once more. Together they admire the little apple tree they planted, the one quietly growing over everything he has buried. How, they laugh, could they ever sell it now? But the soft, happy ground beneath their feet still holds every secret he has hidden away in the dark. Mansu calls out for Si-won to come away from the apple tree and not play over there. Therefore even his gentlest fatherly words carry a hidden weight, steering his child softly away from the ground that holds his secrets. Mansu frets aloud that bugs are eating the beloved apple tree alive, just like the pear tree in his old, sad bedtime story. Therefore the small, gnawing worm of guilt keeps eating quietly away at the edges of his hard-won, fragile peace. A radio voice marks the turning of the season. The autumn rain that fell, it says, seemed to mourn the passing of the year, and now winter draws one step closer. So the cold closes gently in around the family's strange, uneasy new dawn. Frost begins to gather on the windows. The children head off to school as if nothing in the world had ever happened, and Si-won is somehow still friends with the boy from the phone trouble. But a quiet, haunting question lingers in the cold air. Can an ordinary life really grow over so much buried darkness? And so we circle all the way back to that gentle father from the very beginning. He lost only his job, and he told himself there was just one seat left in all the world. He took that seat by any means he could, then walked calmly home to his happy family and his warm house. The loop closes here. He kept everything he fought for: the home, the wife, the children, the tree heavy with apples. But he is no longer the good man who once refused to harm a single soul. The bugs still eat the tree from the inside. The ground still holds its secrets. And the gentle father simply puts on his coat, goes back to work, and tells himself one last time, as he always has, that he had no other choice.